Carl, thanks for joining. This is the Emerging Payments Association's Financial Inclusion Project on affordable credit. Thank you for taking the time to join the interview. So, first question from us is, could you give us a bit of info about Fair by Design and what your mission is?
Yeah. Fair by Design is it's an organisation dedicated to getting rid of the poverty premium or the extra costs of being on a low income. And we look at essential services. So we want to make sure that all consumers, but low-income consumers, are paying a fair price for their essentials like consumer credit, like insurance, like household energy. We're cut up into two separate parts of our organisation. One deals with policy, government, regulators, and corporates as well, where that matters in terms of trying to make sure that the poverty premium is lowered and reduced for all consumers. And then there's an investment fund side, which invests money into new startups who are also at the forefront of making sure consumers today don't pay an unfair price for their essential products and goods.
How do you feel that financial institutions, networks, governments can help to promote and support inclusivity in financial services?
Inclusivity for us has to be about understanding consumers and customers and citizens. It has to be truly about understanding, their lives rather than creating products and services, which is what tends to happen at the moment, based on the biases of product designers or service designers. So we at Fair by Design, we call this inclusive design. Inclusive design is the process and set of processes that it would take to properly understand people's lived experiences, people's actual lived reality. So what we don't end up creating is a set of products and services that are really just based on assumptions of the lived realities of those people creating those products and services. The other side of this, inclusivity isn't about signalling good intentions. It's about making change actually happen. And we work with regulators, government and firms to actually bed inclusivity into service provision, to make sure that nobody is left behind, and importantly, to make sure products and services are designed to empower consumers and make essential services like financial products accessible and affordable.
I read an article, I can't remember when, it was about mortgage companies, so it's not necessarily linked to kind of financial inclusion. It was more around the kind of inclusive design component, I suppose, of most mortgage companies freely admitted that they hadn't done any user testing on their processes.
Right. I mean, that's very interesting, and I agree with you, because I think what you're saying there is that there is a pressing priority for some firms to understand their customers a bit more than others. And I think some consumers are stuck in a rut where products and services are waiting for them to come to it, rather than creating products and services that can be designed around them. Yeah. And I think many consumers today know that as well. So it's a dignity thing as well. I think it's about actual user testing as well, because user testing in the sense of workshopping an idea with a few customers, showing or demonstrating via product demos or whatever, doing user testing and say, I tick that box now, isn't sufficient in my opinion. No. It's got to be co-creation, and co-create, particularly those people who are at risk of real financial exclusion today. You're co-creating with people whose lives are much more complicated than people like mine, for example. Then you'll make sure then you'll be able to get those better outcomes, or you'll be in a much better position to get those best consumer outcomes if you have that in mind. And that means a culture change. That means a cultural shift. That's what we're in the game of. But I think it's really, really important that people who are designing services that aren't just nice to have, but are essential, your household energy, your bank, your financial services, your insurance products, they have an extra special responsibility to make sure that they really know things that meet their customers' needs and potential customers' needs.
So what role do you feel that broader education has in helping to drive financial inclusion?
Well, I think education is very important, but it has its limits. I mean, there are things that education, be that financial education or what have you, will only go so far if we want to achieve good customer outcomes. That's just the honest perspective of me and of Fair by Design, because people's lives are very complicated and busy, and the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of revealed that there are more people whose lives are complicated as we originally thought, and more people whose lives have been rendered complicated by the pandemic. So if products and services are too complicated for us at our busiest, or when we are stressed, then they're not working well, in my opinion. And that's why we don't, that's why we do see bad consumer outcomes. Consumer outcomes for particularly people who are in vulnerable situations or on very low incomes. So financial education for me should not be a stand-in for simple services that help us get through our normal day-to-day lives. I'm not saying it's not important, not by a long shot, but any financial education needs to be coupled with making sure that services and products work well for consumers, and the onus should be on firms to make that happen.
I would say that's a really important thing. As you say, there is a responsibility on these businesses to not just allow people to get into debt or to make poor decisions. They should be trying to guide them to the right decision, taking into account the complexity of their lives.
Banks and other firms have a responsibility and a commitment, and should have commitments towards enabling that sort of engagement with them. That would be really, really useful. But I always think of it as this: firms have they tend to have, in their relationship with customers and consumers, a bit more power, a bit more insight into their suite of products, and time and resource to be able to kind of know that customer well and know what sort of products and services would not work for them best. So while obviously we all have responsibilities for ourselves, and customers with firms have responsibilities over what kind of relationship that they have with them, there's always going to be a power imbalance between big firms and small consumers. That's just a fact. And I think firms have to be responsible when it comes to that. And they will know when products and services are not working for the best to that customer. If it's a high interest credit product, they'll see what kind of impact this is having on customers.
Financial education will kind of be never more important than over the next 2 years, let's say, as people try to recover, to prevent them perhaps, where they've lost jobs or have been financially impacted, spiraling into negative places, debt or other. Are there any kind of things you would pick out to say, well, I think these are some of the things that we really need to focus on as we try and help everybody get back to employment, steady income?
I think financial education shouldn't assume that people are making bad decisions because they are stupid. I think that the pandemic has revealed that life's complicated. Life's extremely complicated, and there are people who have been hit by this pandemic a lot harder than others, and it has really rearranged the way in which they live their lives. And it's a mess. It's a miserable mess. It's no one made this pandemic, but we all have a responsibility. We all have a part to play in making sure that's simpler for people, and that's not made more complicated by complicated processes. Providers of essential services, financial services, banks, challenger banks, all of these institutions, all of these organisations have a huge role to play in making sure that they empower their consumers to get out of this sort of mess that COVID-19 has left behind in a way that helps their lives, improves their finances. It's not going to be easy, but I think first and foremost they have to understand the true lives of those customers, those consumers.